writing me a letter right for grad school.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna get him to write me one for grad school.
So I'm trying to go to Arkansas for history. Is your boys in English?
All right, so welcome to Old English, and I have posted a film for Friday, basically. So it was made in the 1980s, but this stuff hasn't really changed. And so it looks at the development of English, and it's very well done, and it's really worth your watching. So I'm going to show how much you should be watching it, because it combines Old English and Middle English. It's called the Story of English, the Mother Tongue. And so I'll send you an email it's about half of it, and then the second half you'll be watching when we get to Middle English. So this is we're starting Old English today. We just really have been doing this prep work before. You've been reading about the structure of language, because we need some basic linguistic terminology. The little very short chapter, only 4 pages, chapter 4, that focused on phoneme and allophone, morpheme, and allomorph, because these are important categories these are concepts that have changed over the history of English. So it's good to know those, and so just make sure you read that short chapter also. And language actually it changes on all the levels. It changes on the phonetic and phonological levels. The sound system of the language changes, and we'll be looking at how from Old English we got to today, or how Old English was different from how the English phonological system is today. So there is a difference there. Language English has also changed in the area of morphology, which is those smallest meaningful units of language that are used to derive new words or to inflect existing words. And the biggest change, I would say, in the area of English morphology has been that English has lost a lot of inflectional morphemes. English used to be typologically a much more synthetic language. Or inflected language. It inflected nouns, it inflected verbs much more than present-day English does. So we have English has boiled down to only 8 inflectional morphemes in present-day English, but it had dozens of different kinds of inflectional morphemes. And when we talk about the Old English morphology, we'll look at how nouns were inflected and verbs also. So syntax is an area which also changes, and we mentioned briefly that there has been this overarching change of more reliance on inflectional morphology, and from that kind of a language that Indo-European had a lot of inflections. Germanic had a little bit, less, and then Old English even less, and present-day English even less. So that kind of an overarching difference a change has been going on in the area of morphology, and that has changed the syntax, so that Old English syntax was still relatively free. You could use different word orders, but in present-day English we have to stick to subject, verb, object. Like I like chocolate. Okay, we can occasionally say chocolate I like when we want to really foreground that and emphasize that it's chocolate that I like, but that's rare. So English has a very strict word order. Today, Old English was freer, and we'll see when we talk about morphology, we'll see why. Because it indicated by morphemes what was the subject and what was the direct object. Language can change also in the area of semantics, which is that meanings of words change over time. Sometimes they may be changing even, during your lifetime. A word may change its meaning from, you are young and a particular word has used in this way, and then, when you are grandparents, the word may be used slightly differently. So it may sometimes happen relatively rapidly. Lexicon changes, we lose words and we add words into our word stock. And also graphics and orthography change. So if you look at, for instance, we already looked at this Vaderore, the Lord's Prayer, when we started this class. And the first thing probably that you notice is, like on line 2, you have these thorns, these graphemes are like letters, and they're different. We don't use them anymore. On line 4, there's an F used in Jevurde, Finvilla, and another F in the word Erdan, on Erdan. So F and thorn, we have lost them from our orthography. And then on the next, in the first word, we have the ash, which is the digraph, like an A and an E glued together. That's the runic symbol also, like the thorn and the F, and that is called ash. And it corresponds to the sound so we haven't lost the sounds that were represented in Old English with ash and thorn and F. We still have those sounds, but we don't mark them with those letters anymore. So orthography has also changed. It's clear from the very first 2 words in the Lord's Prayer, Vaderore, our Father, the word order has changed. And if you look at line 2, you can see that morphology has changed. Eart, today we say are, you who are, and we don't say you who art. In Shakespeare's times, and in King James Bible, that's still the form that was used, but we have lost that inflectional ending. You art, thou art. We just say you are, okay? And Helvanum has the inflectional ending It's actually the dative plural. We'll learn more about these when we look at the morphology and the case system of Old English. But is an inflectional ending. If you leave that out, the word Helvon looks very much like heaven, right? But this is literally in heavens, you who are in heavens, in the plural. The ending, the dative plural, is required in this particular case by the on preposition. The Old English preposition on required the dative case, and the dative plural case was It was one of those nice things that it was always in dative plural. Well, anyway, I will, by the way, be sending, or I may already have posted, I think I posted this last night, on Blackboard, so you don't have to, even take photographs of these, so which becomes clear when you look at this, and this is very, very small. So here's the same thing, Lord's Prayer, and why I included this here is because it has the translation here at the bottom, but more importantly, it has the IPA transcription of the text. And as you know, part of this class is that you actually get in touch with me at the end of the semester, and you're given a text and you will read that text to me. We'll probably do it, over Zoom or FaceTime or what have you. we'll talk about that later, but you can practice. And we will do some practice here also in class, so that I will read a line and you will then read that same line, so it doesn't feel so weird. And what you can do, like here for instance, you already know IPA. This is the reason why we learned IPA initially, so that you can do this reading. The elongated vowels are indicated by a colon. Like for instance, can you see that at all? Kind of, sort of. So let's. So it's a long vowel. Like on line 1, ure is ure and not ure. Okay, ure. And on line 3, si, thin, nama, ja halhod. Okay. Let's read this since we have it in a bigger form, so that I'll read a line or part of a line, and you repeat. So you will start doing this practice from the first day on that we are looking at Old English. So, fader ure. Thuthe eart. On heavonum. Siithin nama. Jehalhod. So here, in these new editions, they have a little bit of a crutch for us non-native speakers of Old English. So they put a little dot under a word, like a g, if it's to be pronounced as ye. So jehalhod. And the middle g, we'll talk more about that. It's a voiced fila fricative, something like that. I'm not a native speaker of Old English. I speak it with a Finnish accent. But anyway, it's a sound that we have lost. Okay, line number 4. Tobekume fin riche. And if there's a little dot under C, it's pronounced as ch. Riche is kingdom. You can see the connection, the semantic connection between rich and kingdom. So we have the word rich, but its semantics, its meaning has changed. Let's take it again. Tobekume fin riche. Je wurde thin will. Thin will. On earthen. Swa. That's just as. On heavenum. Okay, and then we so that line means may your will happen. Thin will, your will, je wurde made happen. May happen, your will, on earth. And earth, of course, is like our earth, but when we see it with the ending, with the case ending on, earthen, that's required by the preposition on. Just like in German, case endings are required by different case endings by different prepositions, and same thing in Old English, because those related languages. So on earthen, it kind of camouflages the fact that the word earth is really, we know that word, earth, and then swa is just like so, meaning as, and then again we have on heavenum with the dative plural. Okay, and then the next line gives us this wonderful word, jedäihwamlikan. So, urne jedäihwamlikan hlaaf. Hlaaf. What would hlaaf be? Let's start from that. Spread. Loaf. So we get the word loaf from hlaaf. Okay. Our and our is urne in the accusative case. So we have our, but and urne, it again has a case ending there, which camouflages that it's actually, say a different form, like fader ure and then urne, our. Okay, jedaihuamliikan looks really like intimidating, but if we unpack it, it's not so much. So, what does it? Does anyone remember how this line in the Lord's Prayer? Yes, give us today our daily bread. Urne our daily jedaihuamliikan and hlav bread. Our daily bread. Give us today. Of course, today is obvious. We just write it together. But today is, we have gotten that directly from Old English. But if we look at jedaihuamliikan, get rid of the ending, the unending, so we get jedaihuamliik, and leek is the same as like. So we have daily. Li has been shortened from an Old English derivational suffix, leek or leech, and ye is just like, if you've looked at German, studied German. German has a lot of these ge beginning words, and so did Old English. If you get rid of that, what we have left is daihuam, and then we have just gotten rid of this huam part of it, and what is left is daily. So it's hidden there, it's camouflaged with all this morphology that is surrounding it. So from jedaihuamliikan we get daily. Okay, does that make sense? So, okay, let's read that line again. Urne jedaihuamliikan hlav. Hlav. Lovely consonant cluster in hlav. We've lost that, unfortunately. We just say loaf today. We've kept loaf, but the meaning has changed. The pronunciation has changed. Syle uus todai. Todai. Actually, it's a long o. Todai. And how does the next line go in translation? And forgive us our sins. Gultas is the same as sin, but of course we've kept the word, but it has changed its meaning a little bit. Guilt, yeah, and forgive us our guilts, our sins. And
as we forget those.
Yeah, not and, but and. And in Old English it was pronounced as a back vowel. And forgive us. Urne gultas. Okay, gultas is the plural of gult. Okay. Swa we. Forgivath. Urum gultendum. Good. And nejelad. And nejelad thu. And not lead you. Again, get rid of ye in front of jelad, and it's more obvious that it means lead. And not lead you. Us on kostnunge. Okay, let's take the whole line. And nejelad thu us on kostnunge. Where are we asking that we not be led? Into temptation. Yeah, temptation is a word borrowed from French, but this is an Old English word that we have pretty much lost. Ak alys us alus us of uvele. What is uvel?
Evil.
Yes, but how does it translate into English?
Deliver us.
Yeah, and deliver us.
And deliver is again a later addition from French, and deliver us from evil. So uvel is an old English word, it just changed into evil. And then we have the amen there, which is literally truthfully, truly, sothliche. Sothliche. Soth, we talked about that already, that we keep it only in very restricted expressions in English, like he's a soothsayer, he tells the tells the truth. All right, so this kind of like shows, this very short passage shows the change on all the levels of language, and then Old English, it sounds oddly familiar to us. It was spoken from between 450 to 1100. And English is a wonderful language in the sense that it has this birth year. Actually, the birth year is given as, according to the historical records, 449. Before that, there really was no English yet. But it was imported, English was imported to be born in the British Isles in 449. And we'll look at why it was imported. But here's just a quick division of the different timelines that we will be looking at in this class. So Old English was spoken between around 450 and 1100. Middle English from 1100 to about 1500, early modern English from 1500 to 1800, and then after that we refer to our variety of English as present day English, PDE. Now this is, of course, these kinds of divisions are arbitrary, because it's not like one day in 1100 people went to bed speaking Old English and woke up speaking Middle English. It doesn't happen that way. It's a very gradual process. But these divisions have been made based on the fact that, that during each of these 4 periods, the language on an average differs from the previous period in significant ways already. So we can make a generalization that, hey, the language has changed in this way quite a bit compared to something maybe 200 years earlier. This timeline is not arbitrary. It's arbitrary, yes, but it's not arbitrary in the sense that these changes that caused language to these events that caused language to change were something external that happened in the world. So language change does not happen in a vacuum. Obviously, it happens when something happens in the world, society. If you just quickly think about what's going on in today's world, it's a big thing, this whole COVID thing. It has given us a lot of words, new words like COVID hairdo, and you know, whatever we refer to the masks, you know, people may use some other different kinds of words. Can you think of any other words that we have gotten because of COVID? Well, COVID itself is something that didn't exist as a word.
Coronacation.
Yeah.
Coronacation? Instead of Californication? Is that what it is?
It was whenever everyone got like 2 extra spring breaks, they were like, ah yes, my coronacation.
Yeah, yes.
I've heard schmizing, which is like smiling with your eyes.
Yeah.
Since nobody can see your smile under the mask, you have to like squint your eyes to make it look like you're
To
smiling.
make it look like a smile, and I smile, right? Or you know, social distancing. It was a term coined for this whole thing. So it changes. Something happens in the world, and language changes. Language is not immune to change. And what happened in 449 was that the Angles and Saxons and Jutes and Frisians, the Germanic tribes, came to the British Isles and brought their dialects with them, and that's what gave birth to the English language then. 1100 is very close to a huge event from the point of view of the history of English. What was that huge event?
The Norman conquest.
The Norman conquest in 1066. William the Conqueror, William I, came with his Frenchmen and took over for a long time, for centuries. And that changed the language because French words kept coming in because of the contact. French was the official language for over 300 years in the British Isles. Then 1500, it coincides with Henry VIII, his ascendance to the crown, and then ensuing Reformation. And so these kinds of historical big events, they may cause language change and help us to do this demarcation of the history of English. Now, how do we know about the history of English? We are very, very lucky because English actually has old English texts written. So the earliest texts, they date from the 7th century AD or Common Era, and that is just fantastic. We are in a really good position to look at the history of English because there are these texts that we can look at. Not only religious texts, even though these are prevalent, but also historical texts like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which was a chronicle kept by monks in monasteries, and they, recorded historical events. There is also literature, like the Beowulf poem. I don't know if you had a chance to click on that link that I posted online, where this guy is reading Beowulf and very, very beautifully and fluently. So it kind of gives you an idea of how English sounded. Definitely a foreign language to us. There are problems with the written texts, of course, because there are not enough of them. They certainly, the texts that we have, they don't contain all the possible forms and words, and there are some uses that are missing, areas and time periods that are not covered, not represented. So it's not like, but you think of it's a sample of what a small sample of what there actually was, and a small sample of language in the sense that the spoken language it's always a different kind of an animal than written language. Written language is always more formal, but we're really lucky to have all those texts. Another problem is that these texts must be interpreted. If we see a form, is it really how that word was used, or is it perhaps a clerical error? Are there patterns? We have to look for patterns in those texts. Can we trust the spelling? If you think of present-day English, the spelling of the word I and I, or wound or wound, it's not obvious from how a word is spelled as how it's pronounced, but you just then kind of have to do some guesswork. Old spellings, they may tell us about pronunciation. Like during early modern English times, we have these texts. They are business records from harbors in New England, like in Boston, where therefore was written therefore, Edward was written Edward, and administer was written as administer without the R at the end. So that tells about earlier pronunciations that in that part of the United States, around the Boston area, the R was not pronounced, so Edward became Edward in writing. And the writing tells that that's how the clerk was pronouncing it. Also, many texts are translations, and the language that the text is translated from, it may have influenced the syntactic structure, sometimes even word choices or morphology. So there are some other sources to kind of like complement the written texts. Descriptive statements, there are some descriptive statements of earlier forms of English. Recordings come much later because there was no equipment to do recordings until very recently in the human history. Contemporary today's dialects may tell about earlier forms of English. Loan words in English are helpful also, because if a loan word has been borrowed from a language where it was pronounced in a certain way and now it's pronounced in present day English in a certain way, that may give an indication of what kinds of sound changes were going on in English. And contemporary spellings may tell, like for instance, the classic example, we pronounce this as knee. Old English speakers pronounced it, as knä. So just the long a. So Old English, when you read Old English, knowing IPA is really helpful, because Old English keeps these. It was spelled much more phonemically. So what you see is what you get. Okay, let's talk just a little bit about the history. I always try to warn my students that this class is about linguistics, language change. It's not about history. But of course, history matters because historical events give that background to the language, where it then molds according to some historical events, the external change. There's always a language internal change that happens regardless of what's going on in politics or society or culture or whatever. But external change is often also a very strong influence for language change. So before the Germanic tribes came to England or Britain, Britannia, as the Romans named it, it was inhabited by Celtic-speaking peoples. Celtic-speaking peoples who are ancestors of today's Irish and Scots and Welsh. And so they just a quick check, is Celtic an Indo-European language or? Yes, it is an Indo-European language. So these were Indo-Europeans who made it to the British Isles before the Germanic tribes. So they had been there. It's not known how long, when exactly they got there, but they were settled there firmly. And then the Roman Empire kept growing and growing, and Romans conquered Britain in 43 Common Era, and kept it for about 350 years. So the Roman legions, the Roman soldiers, there was this huge number of Roman soldiers in England. I think some estimates give like 50,000. So that's a huge army. They left a lot of cultural, their cultural influence was significant. You can still go to England and you see these Roman walls and the Hadrian's wall that they built is still there. You can go to English towns and you can see, like, for instance, in St. Albans, which is really close to London, you can see these remnants of the Roman architecture, and it's just like a regular park there. In Bath, or Bath, as the Brits say it, it's on the other side of, on the west coast of England, and that's a old Roman bath town where you can go and visit the establishments where they took baths or baths. So the Romans withdrew. Why did they leave? Because the Roman Empire started to crumble in the early 5th century, and they were needed. These troops were needed at home because Roman Empire was in trouble. It was being attacked there, and so the legions were called home. And if you imagine, if a place has been occupied by 50,000 people for over 300 years and then they leave, then what is left is a power vacuum. Like, today we still talk about, okay, can we bring the troops home, and what kind of a military power vacuum would there be, and what kind of trouble would happen if the troops came home. Well, that happened in this case. So the Roman legions, they withdrew, and that left a huge power vacuum there in Britannia, in the British Isles, and that led to internal fighting. There were several different, Celtic tribes, Scots and Picts, and people from Wales, and there was this internal fighting. Who's going to get the power now, since the Romans are gone? And these Celts, many of them had been Romanized. They had become Christians, and there was this Romanized Celtic king whose name was Vortigern, and he looked at the fighting that was going on, and they tried to look for help from the Romans. Hey, come back and help us keep these internal wars in control, but Romans were busy otherwise. So Vortigern turned to the Germanic tribes in what is today's Denmark and Holland and Germany. And asked these tribes to come. They were like mercenary soldiers, in a way. We can call them mercenary soldiers. They agreed to come, and they came in 449. And these were basically often we talk about, or books talk about, Angles and Saxons and Jutes, but Frisians were one of those tribes as well. They arrived in 449, and many of them decided to settle. They thought, well, this is a nice piece of real estate, we'll stay. Not everybody. Okay, so what happened was the Celts, they were left only the remote corners of Scotland and Wales and Cornwall, so they were pushed to these remote corners. What happens always, or typically, what happens when a place is conquered, the indigenous population is pushed to the, to the remote parts, and that situation it continues. We find the Scots and in the northern part, Wales, in the western part, Cornwall, in the southwestern part, and those are, you know, the areas where these indigenous Celtic tribes were pushed. Some calm was brought into the island for a little while though, and the relationships between the invading Germanic tribes and the Celts, they were not necessarily always bad. We don't know. There are no. I mean, there are some historical accounts of that, but it tends to be from the point of view of those who were conquered and not from the point of view of the conquerors, because the Germanic tribes, they were not only pagan, but they were also illiterate largely. So, okay, so that was the first Germanic conquest of the British Isles, and then there were the Viking raids. Vikings a little bit later. Vikings referred to as Danes, Norwegians, Norsemen, and then the Norman invasion, a third Germanic invasion of England, ethnically Germanic, but linguistically the Norman invasion was importing the Romance language, French, into England. So then the year around 1200, that was important because that kind of put the end to the influence of the French language in England, but we'll talk more about that when we talk about Middle English. So let's see, this is very small, and I've posted this online for you on Blackboard. So this just shows the basic rough areas from where the Germanic tribes came to England. So we've got England here, and the Jutes came from what is today's Denmark, that peninsula there. So Jutes came from there, and they went to the southeastern parts of England. Then we have Angles, and they just, you know, crossed the North Sea basically there. Frisians came from the coast of what is like Holland today. Saxons from what is, you know, the area roughly Germany. So so we have these invasions coming in, and they came because they were invited. This is King Alfred, who eventually brought some peace, but let's look at this one first. So we have Angles and Saxons and Jutes and Frisians coming from continental Europe across the North Sea and settling there. So that was in 449. And then the Vikings, the Viking raids started like 700s, towards the end of 700s, and they lasted for a couple hundred years. And then King Alfred, Alfred the Great, the only English king who is referred to as great, he won the Vikings, and in the Treaty of Wedmore, he brought peace. There was a lot of, you know, internal fighting there between the Anglo-Saxons, who are the descendants of Angles and Saxons and Jutes and Frisians, and then the Vikings. So we had the West Germanic tribes and then the North Germanic tribes who were fighting there over power, over areas, and so on. And King Alfred was an Anglo-Saxon king, and he won the Vikings in a significant victory, and dedicated a particular place for them where they could have their own laws, and that place was called, do you remember
The
why?
The Danelaw.
Danelaw, yes. So in the Treaty of Wedmore, that was important. So so that was the Viking invasions, and then the Norman invasion, which started basically the Middle English period. They came from France, and they were also descendants of Vikings. Okay, and then to the important stuff. English consonants, right? So this is posted there, so you don't have to, necessarily copy it. It's also in your book. You have this, and we've done. This is the reason why we've done consonants in present-day English, so that we can see what has changed. And if you just glance at this, what looks familiar to the present-day English consonant chart? If you look at the stop consonants, p, b, t, d, k, g. Is that the same or not? It's the same, right? Okay, and then next we have the two affricates, ch and j. Do we have those in present-day English? Sure, we do. Now, let's skip the fricatives. Let's look at the nasals. Let's actually start from the very bottom of this chart. Semivowels or glides, w and y. Do we have those? Yes, those have remained. Then the liquids, the lateral liquid, ol, and the retroflex liquid, Do we have those? Yes. The was pronounced most likely in Old English. It was pronounced more like a Spanish but those two, we've pretty much kept the exact pronunciation. May have changed for quite a bit. Nasals, and n. What's different here? We've added something. How many nasals does present-day English have? And yes, the velar nasal indicated with the engma. Now this was a sound in Old English. It was an allophone of the phoneme n. So in Old English, and this is why we always, when we talk about phoneme structure, the phonology of a variety of a language, we always have to emphasize which variety of English are we talking about. So in Old English, the phoneme n had two different realizations, or allophones. So this is the phoneme in slanted brackets, and then or slanted, between slanted lines, and these between brackets, these were allophones of the phoneme. So it had two different allophones. This was pronounced in front of a velar, like g or k, and this was pronounced in all the other sound positions. So there has been a change, that kind of a change. This developed slowly but steadily over the centuries. So in present day English we have minimal pairs such as kin versus king, right? But in Old English, there were no minimal pairs. This was predictably the pronunciation in front of g and k. It is a kind of assimilation according to the place of articulation, because what kinds of sounds are g and k in terms of their place of articulation? Velars. What kind of a nasal is in terms of its place of articulation? Vlar, yes. So the Vlar allophone was chosen in front of Vlar sound. So, you keep the place of articulation same. That's easier for pronunciation. That's the process of assimilation. Just very quickly, the fricatives, what's missing there? So Old English had, this is the Old English consonant phonemes. Old English had, so do we, had so do we, had s, so do we, had sh, so do we, had h, so do we. What is missing? The voiced counterparts of they existed only as allophones, only as variants of these voiceless fricatives. And it was during Middle English times that English added the voiced fricatives into the phoneme inventory. So this is where we need to stop, and we will. But we'll continue from there. And you'll find this PowerPoint posted on Blackboard. And look at that film. I'll send you exactly the place, how much, roughly half of it you should watch now, and then we'll save the other half for Middle English. Okay, have a good rest of the week. Bye.